It was a scorching afternoon at Riverside International Airport. The terminal buzzed with people rushing to their gates, luggage clattering, and announcements blaring overhead. Andre Jackson, a bright 16-year-old with a love for strategy, was walking swiftly towards his gate. This flight was his gateway to something big, the National Math Olympiad in San Francisco. A win there could mean a full scholarship to his dream college. Holding a worn notebook and a few math problem sets, he felt both nervous and hopeful. Andre had never traveled alone before, but this trip felt like his first true step toward independence. Boarding the plane, he settled into his aisle seat, tucking his backpack under his feet and glancing around, already deep in thought about his upcoming competition. His focus, however, was interrupted when he noticed a flight attendant, a stern-looking woman, eyeing him suspiciously as she moved down the aisle. Andre was accustomed to uneasy glances, but he tried to brush it off. As he glanced over at the empty seat next to him, he considered stretching out a bit for more room to study. Polite as always, he waved to the attendant and quietly asked if he could use the extra space to spread his notes. Her reaction was instant. Her face tightened. "No," she snapped, barely meeting his gaze. "That seat isn't for you." Andre felt a flush of surprise but tried not to dwell on it. He had faced situations like this before and knew it was better not to make a scene. Just as the plane was preparing for takeoff, the same flight attendant returned, her demeanor sharper than before. "You need to leave this plane," she said curtly. Andre blinked, thinking he'd misheard. "Leave? I haven't done anything wrong," he replied, his voice shaking slightly. The attendant raised her voice, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "You're causing a disturbance. If you don't leave voluntarily, we'll escort you off." Embarrassment and frustration bubbled up in him, but Andre had little choice. With all eyes on him, he gathered his things, left the plane, and found himself alone back in the bustling terminal. Heart pounding, he sat on a bench, unsure of what to do. But the longer he sat, the more his embarrassment transformed into anger. He knew what had just happened was wrong, and he wasn't about to let it slide. Taking out his phone, he began typing out a post, recounting every detail of what had just occurred. "Just got kicked off a flight for no reason. Apparently asking to sit comfortably is a crime. This isn't right, and I won't be silent about it." He tagged the airline and added a few hashtags, including hashtag Justice for Andre. Determined to be heard, he sent the message to his friends and asked them to spread it. Within moments, his post was gaining attention. Likes, retweets, and comments began pouring in. Meanwhile, back on the plane, several passengers who had witnessed the incident were puzzled and pulled out their phones, some even sharing their accounts of what they'd seen. Slowly, questions started bubbling up, and murmurs filled the cabin. The flight attendant, once calm and collected, now seemed uneasy as passengers whispered and looked at her, visibly questioning her decision. In the terminal, Andre watched in awe as his story continued to spread. His phone buzzed continuously with notifications as people online rallied in his defense. News outlets quickly picked up the story, and in no time, hashtag Justice for Andre was trending. Passengers on the flight and supporters online were now demanding answers. The airline's management was soon alerted, and they dispatched a representative to find Andre. The representative, a man in a sharp suit and nervous smile, approached Andre, apologizing profusely. "We're truly sorry, Mr. Jackson. This situation is unacceptable, and we're working to correct it immediately. Please allow us to put you on the next available flight. All expenses covered." But Andre wasn't ready to brush the incident aside. Looking the man in the eye, he said firmly, "I didn't just lose a seat. I lost respect. What happened to me needs an answer." Just then, a notification popped up on Andre's phone. A high-profile activist had shared his story, adding millions more eyes to the unfolding incident. The representative, clearly shaken, assured Andre that an internal investigation would be conducted and that the flight attendant involved would be suspended until further notice. Hours later, Andre boarded a different flight, not just as a passenger, but as a symbol of resilience. When he arrived in San Francisco, his story had become a rallying cry for fairness and respect. Reporters waited for him at the airport, and supporters welcomed him, eager to hear how he had held his ground. Days later, He took part in the Math Olympiad, channeling his focus and determination into every problem. He didn't just compete, he shone, becoming a symbol for standing up against unfair treatment. As Andre shared with a reporter, in math, every problem has a solution. Turns out, life isn't so different. What began as a journey to a competition became a call for justice. His story serves as a reminder that speaking up can make a difference, even when the odds are stacked against you. Want to hear more stories of courage and strength like Andre's? Follow along and join our community of changemakers, standing together for a fairer world. Let's make every voice heard. In the weeks that followed, Andre's story continued to spread. News channels replayed clips from his interviews, and social media remained flooded with posts sharing #JusticeForAndre. It wasn't just a story about a boy kicked off a plane. It had become a nationwide discussion on fairness, respect, and the quiet power of standing up for what's right. Andre's unexpected rise to attention opened doors he had never imagined. Invitations poured in from schools, civil rights organizations, and youth forums, all asking him to speak about his experience. Suddenly, he wasn't just that math kid, but a young leader and a voice for the thousands who had experienced similar injustices but never had the platform to share them. At first, the attention was overwhelming. Andre was just a teenager, after all, focused on his studies and his love for math. But he found strength in knowing that his story had sparked something meaningful. He began accepting invitations to speak at schools, youth gatherings, and small community events. Each time, he shared his story with humility and purpose, inspiring other young people to stand up for themselves in the face of unfair treatment. His school hosted a special assembly, where the principal honored him for his bravery and resilience. Andre showed us that speaking up matters, she said to the crowded gymnasium filled with students, teachers, and even local journalists. Andre stood at the podium, surprised at the size of the crowd. He felt a familiar nervousness as he looked out at his peers, but it was quickly replaced by determination. He shared a message he had been crafting for weeks, weaving in how he'd felt that day, the importance of using one's voice, and how his small act of courage had grown into something he'd never anticipated. The airline, under the intense spotlight, eventually issued a formal public apology. They acknowledged the incident had been mishandled and promised to implement new training for all staff, focusing on cultural sensitivity and fair treatment. They even invited Andre to speak with their training team, allowing him to share his perspective directly with the people who could help create a more inclusive environment for future travelers. And yet, Andre knew his journey was far from over. This story was only the beginning for him. He had discovered a new passion, not only for math, but for using his voice to affect change. He began considering a future where he could combine his analytical mind with his newfound advocacy. Ideas swirled in his head about how he could create something lasting, a program or organization that might help young people stand up for themselves, too. One night, while scrolling through his phone, he noticed an influx of new messages, supportive notes from people all over the country, but a few stood out. They were from kids just like him, who had been ignored, disrespected, or treated unfairly. Some spoke of similar experiences, others simply thanked him for standing up, saying his courage had given them courage too. It was then that Andre felt the true impact of his actions, knowing he had been a catalyst for others to find their own strength. Later that year, he started a small online platform called Voices Rise, a community where young people could share their stories, support each other, and learn about their rights. It was a place where stories like Andre's could be told without fear, a place where voices would be amplified, not silenced. Meanwhile, Andre continued to excel in school, focusing on his studies and preparing for future math competitions. He'd returned to his daily life, but now with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. His friends noticed the change, and even his teachers saw the difference, a young man who knew his worth and who understood the power of his voice. In time, Voices Rise grew, and with it, Andre's vision. He started collaborating with community leaders and organizing small events where youth could gather, learn about their rights, and practice advocating for themselves. He knew this was the work he wanted to continue, no matter where life took him. As Andre looked to the future, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and resolve. His journey wasn't over, In fact, it was only just beginning. He knew there would be more challenges, but now he was ready. Armed with his voice, his values, and a community of supporters, Andre was prepared to face whatever came next, determined to make a difference wherever he could. And as his story spread, he became a reminder to others that sometimes change starts with a single brave step, a moment of courage that echoes far beyond the person who took it.